Welcome to CSSE's online governor development session, supporting schools to develop a trauma-sensitive approach to practice. This recording is part of CSSE's Ethos and Leadership programme, and specifically part of its content for governors. CSSE understands that trauma-sensitive approaches to practice can enhance the school's ethos, and in supporting the well-being of pupils and staff, these approaches create the conditions which support effective teaching and learning. CSSE's officers deliver a range of workshops to support ethos development in controlled schools, and delivery of the Level 2 Developing Trauma-Sensitive Approaches to Practice is training which all controlled schools can avail of by contacting their school support officer. During this online session, we will consider adverse childhood experiences, how these experiences can impact on a child's stress response system, disrupt healthy brain development, and impact on the behaviours that staff may come across in class. We will consider the need to develop a curiosity about children's behaviour, which allows us to reframe the behaviour presenting and consider what the child needs from us to support their regulation. In considering the key characteristics of a trauma-informed school, we will also consider how staff well-being can be supported. In 2019, members of CSSE's education team received training to allow us to become trainers of the Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland's trauma-informed practice content. I would like to thank the Safeguarding Board for providing this valuable training and also commend their work in supporting organisations within health, social care, education, justice and the community and voluntary sectors to integrate a trauma-informed approach across all aspects of service delivery. I would also like to highlight that the majority of the visuals you will see in this recording have been generously provided by the Safeguarding Board. In February 2021, the Department of Education launched the Children and Young People's Emotional Health and Wellbeing in Education framework. The framework calls for a whole child, whole school, whole community approach to ensuring well-being for all. And in outlining examples of good practice, the framework specifically refers to the need to develop trauma-compassionate approaches and to ensure that those who work with our children and young people are also appropriately supported. The Department of Education's publication of its corporate plan for 2023 to 2028 articulates a clear vision that every child and young person is happy, learning and succeeding. More recently, the Education and Training Inspectorate's new inspection framework, with its enhanced focus on the context, ethos and culture of the school and its vision and values, has also highlighted schools' arrangements for health, well-being and keeping safe as central to its inspection process. The trauma-informed practice movement is concerned with supporting recovery from experiences which can all too often follow children into adulthood. And so the term ACEs refers to adverse childhood experiences. And in the research carried out by Mark Bellis, ACEs are defined as stressful experiences occurring during childhood that directly harm a child or affect the environment in which they live. And this slide gives you an indication of the type of experiences we are considering. A traumatic event could be a single event, such as a bereavement, and schools will unfortunately probably be familiar with supporting children and their families through such experiences. But we also have children who experience more prolonged exposure to adverse childhood experiences. We have on this slide examples of child maltreatment and also an indication of the household adversities that children can be exposed to. We are aware that adverse community environments can exacerbate the response to these adverse experiences. Of course, adversity can be experienced in any household, from the affluent to the most deprived, but the research does show that children living in poverty who experience poor housing or live in areas which experience community disruption are more likely to experience an increased number of ACEs. A term often associated with the experience of adversity is the term trauma, and this slide presents us with a definition. Trauma refers to experiences that cause intense physical and psychological stress reactions. This may be from a single event, multiple events, or a set of circumstances experienced by an individual as physically and emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. The word trauma comes from the Greek word trauma or traumatikos, which means wound or hurt. In ancient Greece, the term was used to describe physical injuries, but today it is used to refer to both physical and emotional wounds. Gabor Mate, a Canadian physician, best-selling author and expert on trauma and addiction, states that trauma is not what happens to you, but what happens inside you. For Mate, it is an internal wound, and the severity of that wound relies on what protections are available for the individual to support their healing. Dr. Bruce Perry expands on the definition of trauma provided on the previous slide. You can have a loving family, but if you're continually in a school where you're feeling like you don't belong, you're not the right colour, you're not the right gender, you're not the right religious beliefs, whatever it is, if you are continually in the out-group, it leads to the same emotional, physical and social consequences as capital T trauma. If prolonged enough, small t trauma activates stress response systems and leads to the very same changes in the brain. So the adversities we considered earlier in this presentation may be referred to as our capital T traumas. But Dr. Bruce Perry's definition encourages us to consider the experience of being an other within the school environment. Consider the long-lasting detrimental impact that can be had on children by the experience of bullying, or harsh comments from parents, a lack of emotional connection with a nurturing adult. But when we talk about trauma, and it is often an overused term, for example, I'm traumatized after watching that film, the capital T traumas can give the impression that trauma is exceptional or unusual, and that most of us won't have been affected by trauma. Gabor Mate, on the other hand, argues that in fact, someone without the mark of trauma is the exceptional one in our society. We have no specific whole population statistics regarding the prevalence of ACEs in Northern Ireland. However, Queen's University Belfast carried out an evidence review of trauma-informed practice in 2018, and the review reported that in the absence of a Northern Ireland prevalence study, the findings from the Welsh surveys arguably provide the best comparison, as we have similar demographics and similarly high proportions of deprivation. However, we need to be mindful that Northern Ireland has the highest rates of mental illness when compared to other regions within the UK, perhaps reflective of our history of the Troubles or conflict. The lower part of the slide illustrates the prevalence of ACEs in Wales per 100 of the Welsh adult population. And we can see that half of the adult population have experienced at least one or more ACEs, with 14% of the adult population having experienced 4 or more. The impact of unmitigated ACEs can be severe and can lead to social, emotional and cognitive impairment, the adoption of health-risking behaviours, disease, disability and social problems. In a 2015 study of 700 8-year-olds considering the relationship between early adversities and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it was found that the experience of 3 ACEs or more meant that the child was 3 times as likely to experience academic failure, 5 times as likely to have attendance problems, and was 6 times more likely to experience problems regulating their behaviour. In children with 4 ACEs or more, over 50% had learning problems, and in comparison with a child with no ACEs, these children were 32 times more likely to be challenged with behaviour problems. While we do not have whole population prevalence statistics for Northern Ireland, we do have data in relation to the prevalence of adversity for our children and young people in Northern Ireland. The detail that you see in front of you is taken from the Youth Wellbeing Prevalence Survey, which was carried out in 2020. While this is the most recent data available, I should note that at the time of recording, Queen's University Belfast is engaged in a further survey which will provide us with more up-to-date information on our young people's experiences in due course. What this data does is emphasise the need for trauma-sensitive approaches to support our children and young people. As we await publication of the most recent data, we know from the 2020 survey of more than 3,000 children and young people and 2,800 parents and caregivers that young people in Northern Ireland are 25% more likely to experience common mental health problems such as depression and anxiety compared to young people in England, Scotland or Wales. The survey also reported that 1 in 8 children and young people in Northern Ireland experience emotional difficulties. 1 in 10 have conduct problems. 1 in 7 had problems with hyperactivity. 1 in 10 young people self-harmed. 1 in 8 had suicidal thoughts. In terms of young people's experience of ACEs, the survey revealed that close to 1 in 2 young people aged 11 to 19 years old have experienced at least one or more adverse childhood experience. The most commonly reported examples of ACEs were parental separation, parental mental health problems, emotional neglect, domestic violence, and parental alcohol or substance use problems. Females were more likely to report 3 or more ACEs, and as we have already discussed, young people in the most deprived areas are likely to experience more ACEs. This slide gives us an indication of the behaviour and health impacts of unmitigated ACEs. ACEs which are experienced without the child having adult support to understand, to process what has happened and to heal. Compared to people with no ACEs, people with 4 or more ACEs are 2 times more likely to have a chronic disease, 3 times more likely to have respiratory disease, and the list of detrimental impacts goes on. What I would like to emphasise here is that it is important that we do not pathologise the experience of trauma. Not everyone who has experienced ACEs will go on to engage in these behaviours. The response will depend on what support the child has around them, and there is much that can be done to mitigate the impact of trauma and ACEs. And one of these key mitigations is a supportive school environment. In the next few slides, we will consider how our schools can play a role in interrupting and preventing the negative trajectory depicted on this slide. In order to understand how schools are in a unique position to support the child, we must first of all consider the impact of adversity on the body's stress response system and healthy brain development. This slide provides us with a definition of stress, and every one of us will know what stress feels like. We may feel it in our bellies, our shoulders, our heads. It may lead to anxiety, frustration, and irritability. We may have sweaty palms, headaches, and other physical symptoms. As I said, every one of us will experience it, and the experience of stress is actually necessary for healthy development of our nervous system. However, there are different types of stress. Positive stress can actually support our ability to become more resilient. So we may be talking about the nerves we feel when starting a new job, or a child on their first day of school being separated from their parent for the first time. It may be the stress we feel preparing for an exam. The experience may be a difficult one, but can lead to positive outcomes and growth for us as individuals. Tolerable stress is described as more severe, longer lasting in duration, and the examples given include bereavement, a long-term illness, natural disaster, or experiencing a frightening injury. The response activates the body's alert systems to a greater degree when we experience tolerable stress. However, if the activation of the body and mind's stress response system is buffered by positive relationships with adults who help the child adapt, the brain and other organs recover from what might otherwise be damaging effects. A toxic stress response occurs when a child experiences strong, frequent, and prolonged adversity. This is a type of stress for which there is no adequate adult support. We are talking about incidents of physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, and exposure to violence. When our bodies experience stress, various chemicals are released, including adrenaline and cortisol, which prime our body for fight or flight. When the threat is over, our bodies adjust their response and return to a so-called normal. The prolonged activation of the stress response, however, which comes with the type of experiences associated with toxic stress, can leave some children on constant high alert. Cortisol, which I referred to just a moment ago, is a hormone which lasts in the body for a longer period of time than adrenaline, and its presence can disrupt sleep, which is certainly not good for a child in a school environment. And its effects on the body can lead to dysregulated behaviour long after the threat or perceived threat has gone. The prolonged activation of the child's stress response system has made them hypervigilant threat and less aware of cues which indicate that they are in a safe environment. So this is what we may be witnessing when we see children in our classrooms behaving in a manner which seems to be at odds with the safe environment we are working to provide them with. In considering the impact of toxic stress on our brain and our responses, let us first of all consider how the brain is organised. The brainstem is the first part of our brain to develop and is the part of the brain that keeps us alive. It is our safety system. It warns us of signals of danger and initiates the relevant emotions, behaviours and activity to respond to perceived threat. In the presence of danger, our brainstem works with the limbic system to trigger emotions such as rage, fear and anxiety, primitive emotions necessary for survival. However, it is possible for trauma to have overstimulated this part of the brain, and for children who have experienced prolonged activation of their body's stress response system to be hypervigilant, on high alert when they potentially don't need to be. Traumatized children may anticipate danger where there is none, and while the child is in a safe environment, the primitive brain has not switched off, and so the child is operating constantly in a fight, flight or freeze mode. And so very little information can get passed up to the higher, more sophisticated parts of their brains. Areas of the brain active in fearful states are different from those active in calm states and are not conducive to learning. If a child often feels stressed and unsafe, their brainstem and limbic system become highly attuned to only noticing stresses in the environment. And so if proper development in the first two brain areas does not happen due to the impact of toxic stress, the child will not be able to learn because they aren't able to access their prefrontal cortex, which is where academic learning happens. When we see a child unable to sustain attention, to control their impulses, it is neither their fault nor a deliberate choice, but the result of underdeveloped neural networks damaged through the experience of toxic stress. Something for us to bear in mind, however, is that good experiences and positive relationships can enhance brain development. So repair is possible, as is the creation of new neural pathways. Positive experiences and relationships experienced in the school environment can support this repair. The video you are about to engage with has been authorised for CSSE's use by CISM Arts, who work through the creative arts to support children and young people who have experienced high levels of adverse childhood experiences. This video will consolidate a lot of this information and will give a good indication of how children may present differently in class.
Adverse childhood experiences can appear as overwhelming, sudden, and shocking events, or regular torments within relationships. The feelings that arise from these experiences can be extremely difficult to process for both children and the adults who care for them. Many children who have been affected by adversity have responded to their experiences through the body's natural stress response system. This inbuilt capacity to protect ourselves when our lives are threatened is essential in keeping us alive. However, it can be very damaging to our bodies, minds, and social connections if we cannot return to a place of safety and calm once the threat or danger has passed. Social defense system. Hyperarousal. Children who have experienced traumatic events may appear as defensive, disengaged, or mistrustful. They might refuse to participate, say things which are disruptive or cruel to others, or become angry because of difficult, overwhelming feelings or situations. For some children, this fight or flight impulse may be essential in keeping them alive. However, they may also find it difficult to calm themselves down, manage their emotions, and connect to others. Life threat. Hypoarousal. Some children affected by adversity might lack energy, curiosity, or the willingness to participate in activities and engage in relationships. They could appear tired, collapsed, inattentive, and have difficulty focusing on tasks. They may have had to shut down their social and emotional responses due to their overwhelming life experiences, meaning that they can appear disaffected, disconnected, or frozen. Hypervigilance. Children affected by adversity can also become very vigilant of others' needs, appearing overly eager to please or seeking approval and connection with adults by being good. They may be hypervigilant to new experiences or changes within their routine, or have a fragile sense of themselves when questioned, contradicted, or challenged. It is important to remember that behind every behaviour of an adult or child is the communication of a need. This is especially true when working with children who are affected by adverse childhood experiences. Think of a child with whom you are connected, whether you know of the adversity they faced or not. Take the time to recall a behaviour which presented you with a challenge. What might they be communicating to you? What emotions might be informing your interactions? How might you be able to work alongside them to meet their unmet needs?
And I'd like to thank CISM Arts for allowing us to show that wonderful video, which really does capture the different ways in which children's dysregulation may present in the classroom. The children in that video were certainly not inside their window of tolerance. So what is the window of tolerance? Because this is where we want our children to be. According to this theory, there is a window of arousal states that are optimal for brain processing and functioning. Young people who have experienced nurturing, stable environments and secure relationships often have a wider window of tolerance. They can cope well with minor stresses, and their enhanced capacity for self-regulation to tolerate a wider range of experiences without being pushed out of their window of tolerance comes from having experienced nurturing and responsive caregiving. But as the video showed us, there will be some children whose window of tolerance is much narrower, and small everyday requests may lead to them becoming dysregulated and outside their window of tolerance. This visual shows us two different responses to threat. But what's interesting to note is that while children's distress may present differently, there are similarities in how this distress is experienced internally. If we consider the slide, both children, while presenting differently, are experiencing the same physical symptoms. The child who is hyper-aroused and in fight or flight response is experiencing the same physical symptoms as the child who is hypo-aroused. The child who is experiencing freeze, who has shut down from those around her or him, will potentially experience a faster heart rate, a reduced appetite, and be just as hypervigilant as the child in fight or flight response. For traumatized children, small everyday things like the school drop-off or a change of one classroom to the next can spiral them out of their window of tolerance. What we must remember is that this is not a conscious process. The child is in automatic survival mode. Our brain's primary impulse is to keep us alive. It is an organ which predicts and is not concerned with whether it is accurate or not. So many of these behaviours or responses are happening before the child is even consciously aware of them. Taking an attachment and trauma-aware approach to your classroom does not mean we allow challenging behaviour to go on unchecked. But it is about reframing we think and talk about traumatised children's behavioural patterns. This can then lead to strategies that focus more on redirecting the child and supporting them to reflect on their actions and the impact it may have had on others, rather than applying sanctions which can increase the child's sense of shame and the belief that they and not the action are bad. The trauma lens that you see in front of you is a tool promoted by the Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland for use across all public-facing organisations, for example, the PSNI, Women's Charities, Youth Justice Agency. And again, it emphasises that the response to trauma is a societal issue and not one to be resolved by schools alone. It is relevant in our response to people of all ages and at all stages of life. And what it works to do is encourage curiosity about a person's behaviour. So we will consider it from a school context. So the lens, first of all, encourages us to look at the behaviour, the body language. What is it telling us? The lens encourages us to explore what might have happened. How can you help? Is the person afraid or the child afraid? And to consider, what do they need from you to feel safe? And then, who can support? Is it you? It may not be. So who else can support this child within or outside the school environment? When we take a trauma-informed approach, we begin to understand that the child who is aggressive or not engaging actually has an overactive stress response system, is hypervigilant to any sign of threat, and is not used to feeling safe. So this curiosity about the child's behaviour allows us to think of how we can make this child feel more safe. The child who is noisy and loud, a bit of an attention seeker, is actually seeking connection in the best way that they know how. And it is for the teacher to consider how best this attention can be given. It could be a quiet acknowledgement of their work during class, a smile, a thumbs up, asking them about an interest, communicating again to the child that they are seen and valued by the school. Taking an attachment and trauma-aware approach to your classroom does not mean allowing challenging behaviour to go on unchecked, but is about reframing the way we think about traumatised children's behavioural patterns. This can then lead to strategies that focus more on redirecting the child and supporting them to reflect on their actions and the impact it may have had on others, rather than applying sanctions which can increase the child's sense of shame and the belief that they and not the action are bad. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a model which explains motivation and self-development, may be well known to you. It is the work of Abraham Maslow, an American psychologist who published his theory in 1943. Now, Maslow's hierarchy of needs can be applied to both adults and our children and young people. This visual represents a different range of needs, from the most basic to the most sophisticated of our needs. And essentially, Maslow's hierarchy of needs argues that many needs have to be met before we can become the best that we can be. Schools, as we know, can respond to children's basic and more complex needs, essentially scaffolding their ability to reach that peak we see at the top. But let's start at the bottom. Now think about our physiological needs in a school environment. If we aren't fed and watered, we will not have the ability to engage with our learning. If we don't feel safe in an environment, we won't be motivated to learn. We won't have the mental capacity to engage with our learning. Now, the word hierarchy suggests that one of these type of needs is essentially more important than another. And the model has generally been used to argue that when a lower need is met, the next need on the hierarchy becomes our focus of attention. However, Gareth March, writing in The Voice for Secondary Education, argues that we shouldn't look at Maslow's pyramid as a hierarchy of needs to ascend, but that the focus on each layer can change over time. We may have a child in the classroom whose physiological needs are being met, they are academically capable, however, there are issues with love and belonging. The child has safety needs which impact on his or her ability to make friends, therefore impacting on their sense of school belonging. Gareth March has used the model as a helpful conversation starter for when a pupil comes onto the radar of the pastoral team, and this has informed what strategies are put in place to support the child. While focusing on teaching and learning strategies may be the first thing a teacher may do when considering why a child is struggling in class, as Gareth March writes, it won't matter how many pedagogical strategies I try with a pupil if they are struggling because they can't have a civil conversation with the peer sitting next to them. And again, this emphasises the significant role schools play in meeting so many different needs, and how we cannot assume that children are coming to us with even the most basic needs met. Safety as a need was depicted on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But what exactly do we mean when we use the term safety? According to Gabor Mate, safety is not the absence of threat, it is the presence of a connection. Think about when you walk into a room and you don't know anybody. You may feel tense until you see someone who gives you a smile, who communicates that you are very welcome, that they're glad to see you. We are all searching for it, this sense of safety, this feeling that we are accepted. I want you to think now, how does your school communicate that safety to its community? What does your school do that lets their pupils, their parents know that they are safe, that they can be who they want to be within this school environment? When we feel safe, we are more likely to collaborate, to take risks with our learning, to believe in ourselves. This sense of safety can encourage a sense of belonging to the school. And the research shows that a sense of school belonging is positively related to student functioning. Children and young people's school motivation, their social and emotional well-being, their self-esteem, their classroom behaviour and academic achievement. This image will be familiar to you, depicting as it does the window of tolerance. This is where we want staff to be as well. When we are in a window of tolerance, we are likely to feel calm, relaxed. And when we are calm and relaxed, we are at our best. We are confident, focused, interested, and able to fully engage with our roles. There will, of course, inevitably be times as adults when we are not within our window of tolerance due to the daily stresses of life. We may experience frustration or anger, anxiety or depression. Our fight, flight or freeze response may become activated as a result of these stresses. If we are in the habit of attuning to our emotions, we will have a better likelihood of knowing what we need to do to regulate and to move between these states, entering a window of tolerance once again. There is a science behind the claim that emotions are contagious, and a dysregulated adult will be less likely to be able to calm a dysregulated child, however professional that member of staff may be. Because our own nervous system communicates with the nervous system of another. And I'm sure we've all experienced being in someone else's company and picking up on their emotional cues, and picking up on these in our own bodily sensations, whether they are cues of calm, safety and joy, or signs of emotional overwhelm. As adults, we need to regularly turn the lens on ourselves, to look, to explore and to consider what is it that we need to support ourselves. It is important to take daily steps to look after our emotional health and well-being, for as this slide clearly cautions, you can't pour from an empty cup. And the demands of the role, if an individual is not in the habit of practicing self-care or are not properly supported in the context of their roles, can have physical, psychological and behavioural impacts. Anger and irritation, headaches, anxiety, loss of appetite, an impaired ability to make decisions, potentially leading to unhealthy coping mechanisms. In our Level 2 training, we work with staff to consider the impact of their roles on their health and well-being, the potential to suffer from secondary or vicarious trauma, and how we can protect against this. We consider the need to develop an awareness of our needs, to be able to identify our emotional triggers and what we can do to mitigate these triggers so that we can experience calm. And in emphasising the importance of self-care, we must do away with the idea that we don't have time for it. We have to make time for it if we are serious about being the best we can be for ourselves and for others. Self-care is often not taken seriously and is sometimes depicted as something pink, fluffy and frivolous, but it is anything but. It is crucial, and don't take my word for it. Dr. Bruce Perry, a clinical psychologist who has worked with children who have experienced significant trauma and who has undertaken significant research into this area, has this to say about self-care. If you don't give back to yourself, you simply will not be effective as a teacher, a leader, a supervisor, a parent, coach, anything. Self-care is huge. Unfortunately, many people feel some guilt about taking care of themselves. They view self-care as selfish. It is not selfish, it is essential. Remember, the major tool you have in helping others change, whether you are a parent, teacher, coach, therapist or friend, is you. Relationships are the currency of change. While we all have a personal responsibility to take steps to ensure our well-being, conversations about staff well-being also need to happen within organisations. Good staff mental health is the foundation to a strong culture which allows our children and young people to thrive. And staff need a culture that allows them to be able to say when they're not okay, or to be able to speak about a difficult interaction with a pupil, so that they are set up for going home okay. One of the resources developed by the Anna Freud Centre for Mentally Healthy Schools is entitled 10 Ways to Support School Staff Wellbeing. The centre carried out a consultation which highlighted the diversity of approaches to supporting the mental health and well-being of staff. which led to the development of 10 questions that schools may wish to bear in mind when approaching staff wellbeing. The questions touch on issues which include, but are not limited to, staff stress, school culture and ethos, seeking and signposting to support. They also consider supervision, the potential need to create a space where staff are able to share the challenges they face in their roles with colleagues, a space which allows staff, having been listened to, better able to leave work at work and maintain a healthy work-life balance. On this slide is a poster that was developed to go alongside the resource, and within the resource, those areas are considered in more detail, with further questions to prompt an evaluation of what works well and what more could be done to improve this aspect of staff wellbeing. The resource also includes case studies of schools which touch on issues such as managing staff stress and workload, developing a wellbeing action plan informed by a staff survey, and also includes an example of a staff wellbeing policy. Access to these resources and other resources from the Anna Freud Centre are available in CSSE's resource list, which accompanies this development session. The Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland are clear that creating a trauma-informed culture for staff is about everyday behaviours and interactions, and ensuring that the 6 trauma-informed principles are infused into everything we do. When we feel safe, we are able to share our views, and we are able to be our authentic selves, which promotes our ability to collaborate, which, as another of the trauma-informed principles, supports a positive culture, and which is in evidence when we share knowledge and skills and actively seek to work with other sectors to improve our services. When we experience safety, we are better able to trust, and trustworthiness is established through open and honest communication, again enabling our ability to work effectively as part of a team. Choice can be secured as a principle when we listen to the needs and wishes of staff and offer clear and transparent options. With these principles in place, we also contribute to another, that of empowering our staff. We share power and give staff a voice in decision making. Every organisation has a statutory obligation to promote equality of opportunity and good relations under Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998. Experiencing a culture where there is an intentional effort to understand, recognise and embrace difference can support inclusion and protect against feelings of isolation. Creating a trauma-informed culture informed by each of these principles creates a knock-on effect where experiencing safety can lead to experiencing trustworthiness, choice, collaboration, empowerment and inclusion. The Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland have developed a trauma-informed toolkit to support the embedding of a trauma-informed approach within organisations and systems. This toolkit is designed to help leaders, workforces, services and organisations on their journey to implementing a trauma-informed approach across policy and practice. Based on local and international evidence, it offers in-depth insights from those with lived experience, is infused with cross-sector examples and local research, and provides a checklist for organisations to measure progress. The toolkit can be accessed from the Safeguarding Board Northern Ireland's website and in the link provided in CSSE's resource list. So how do we know that staff wellbeing is not an area of concern in our school? Or to frame it more positively, how do we ensure that we keep it on the agenda and that staff know their wellbeing is a priority? We must give staff plenty of opportunities to voice their opinion about what is going well at school and what requires our attention. Face-to-face forums, staff meetings should be an opportunity for all staff to be able to raise any issues, while staff wellbeing surveys will also support staff in raising issues they may not feel comfortable or confident enough to raise in a face-to-face meeting. A staff survey allows you to establish what is currently happening in your school, to establish a baseline, and it allows the opportunity to consider, but also ask, what more needs to be done. Engaging staff views will communicate that staff well-being is a priority, and when staff feel looked after, they deal with stress better. So what questions do you ask? What surveys do you use? How do you know that you are asking the right questions? There are a number of surveys that schools can avail of, some of which collate the outcomes for schools and which include all manner of other tools. However, I'm going to refer to one free survey from the Department of Education. DE has a self-assessment audit tool to support school development planning in the area of emotional health and well-being. And part of this tool involves a staff questionnaire which is included in our resource list. The survey or questionnaire has specific questions on staff welfare, communication, and professional development. So in considering the characteristics of a trauma-informed school, and in reflecting on our experience of how schools would define their trauma-informed characteristics, it is clear that a trauma-informed school is a school which is curious about children's behaviour, where staff consider the unmet need that the behaviour may be communicating. A trauma-informed school is a school in which adults support children and young people's regulation through the experience of positive relationships and specifically through the curriculum, supporting the children's understanding of how their brains work, what emotions they're experiencing, and how to support their own emotional regulation. A trauma-informed school is a school which supports its children to identify their strengths and where children benefit from adults who model appropriate relationships and treat them with respect and kindness. The children experience safety through consistency, repetition and routine, and the supportive environment engenders school belonging. Children benefit from school staff who take an interest in them and who take a preemptive approach to their classroom practice, and who, through knowing their children, are aware of how attention to the physical environment can also support the child's regulation. The trauma-informed school is one in which every member of the school community understands the prevalence of adversity and the need for empathy. And this empathy and understanding extends to staff as well. While these approaches can be directly targeted to support the needs of a child who has experienced specific adversities, they are also approaches which have universal relevance to the experience of all and can support every member of the school community. Before we conclude, I would like us to consider the following quote from Antonio Damasio, a neuroscientist at the University of Southern California and best-selling author of several works, including The Feeling of What Happens. This quote emphasizes why we need these approaches in schools and how we all benefit from safe, nurturing environments. Safety, encouragement, human warmth cause people to open themselves out towards their environment, approaching it, exploring it, finding it wondrous. The circumstances surrounding the sea anemone determine what it does. Open up to the world like a blossom, at which point water and nutrients enter its body, or close itself in a contracted flat pack, small, withdrawn, and nearly imperceptible to others. This is what we want for our children and young people. This is what we want for those who work with them. We want them to feel safe, encouraged, and loved. And these approaches do not detract from academic achievement. In fact, they support learning. When our children feel safe, they are better able to access their prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain where academic learning takes place. And just like the sea anemone, they open up to the world. They become curious. They engage with the world around them and engage with the experiences and opportunities in life which will help them thrive. Thank you for engaging with this session, and we hope that you and your school will engage with further development opportunities from the Controlled Schools Support Council.